First project I did was colors. This photograph was taken from my basement because my basement table mimics the kind of tables you would see at a casino, and I had these poker chips and playing cards from my own poker set that I got in 8th grade just laying around. I like this photograph because it incorporates the complementary color of the green table to bring out the red from the cards and the poker chips, and uses 3 compositional techniques: rule of thirds, leading lines, and patterns / repetition. Rule of thirds is standard. It's used to position the subject in the upper section of the image and slightly off center. The playing cards act as a leading line to guide the viewers around the poker chips, as well as each individual card is pointing towards the poker chips, emphasizing the idea of winning money. The photograph uses patterns and repetition with the same constant order of the playing cards: ace, hearts, spades, diamond, repeating for each number. The next project I did was the Forgotten project. This is a good photograph because it incorporates abandonment through the idea of a forgotten knight's sword. The background plays a larger part to complement and straighten the feeling of being lost in the wilderness with all the dead leaves and the old oak tree stump, which was in the backyard of my house. This was also taken on a cold, cloudy winter afternoon, which I believed helped with the lighting and mood of the photograph. And in case you're curious, yes, that is a real sword, but don't ask me where I got it. This photograph uses 3 compositional techniques: rule of thirds, contrast, and simplicity. Rule of thirds is standard. It's used to position the subject in the upper intersection point of the photograph to give it the feeling of you reaching out to grab the sword. The photograph uses contrast because you have this dark, rusty sword with slightly more lit background. Obviously, the background doesn't have bright, crazy neon colors, but you can still see the background fairly well as opposed to the darkened blade. Lastly, the photograph uses simplicity because while a lot went into this, at the end of the day, this is just a photograph of a sword that was stuck in the ground next to the tree. The next photograph is from the music project. I like this photograph because I went with this concept of no matter what instrument you play, it's always the song, the instrumentals that I believe sticks with people. And I emphasize that in this photograph because your eyes should immediately notice that the background is in focus instead of the foreground, which is why I also believe that this photograph is also artistic. This leads into the compositional techniques that I use. Depth of field is definitely the main technique used, but not in the way that you think. Typically, in most examples online, you tend to have your foregrounds in focus, and that's usually where your subject is, and blur out the background, as where here I did the complete opposite to, again, emphasize more on the music instrumentals, the music sheet, rather than the instrument. Contrast is partly used because the darker blue in the recorder contrasts with the light blue tint of the music sheet, which I did in editing. The music staffs act as leading lines. The reason it acts as leading lines is because the bottom music staff is guiding the viewer's eye across the recorder. The music sheet is also curved from the top down, which is also leading the viewer's eye to the recorder in the lower bottom. This photograph was taken for the Mimic an Artist project. This was taken at the local Home Depot at the gardening area because at the time all the flowers around the parks were still dead. It's a good photograph because I felt that it was just naturally set up for a black and white photograph, since the flowers were already mostly white with a tint of yellow in some of the highlights. This photograph uses 3 techniques: depth of field, rule of odds, and contrast. Depth of field is used to focus on the middle part of the center orchid, blurring out the background and barely blurring out the third flower. I did this to have the background mimic a garden. Rule of odds is used because there are 3 orchids forming a triangle-like pattern. Contrast is the main technique in this photograph because when it comes to editing photos in black and white, it requires contrast in order to distinguish brighter or lighter colors such as yellow with the darker shades for colors such as green, blue, and purple, as well as the details and highlights. This photograph was taken for the one-word project. The word I chose was taxonomy, which is the branch of science concerned with classification of organisms. It was taken in Luminar Park because it's a good spot to get photographs of geese. However, there just happened to be families of ducks there that day. I love this photograph because it incorporates 4 compositional techniques to capture the moment of swimming ducks. Rule of thirds is standard for most photographs, placing the ducks in the lower horizontal line. Rule of odds is used twice because the subject is the family of 3 ducks and the 3 trees in the reflection of the water. which also serve as a leading and pathway as it is guiding you towards the ducks. Lastly, the photograph uses entrance and exit lines because you enter from the ripple in the water created by the ducks swimming, leading towards their exit under the bridge. The last project I did was the Vlog It project. The subject for this photo is my pastor's dog, Sandy. It was taken at my church during spring break. I actually went ahead of time before the photo shoot to scout the area and take quick snapshots to get ideas of what I had to work with in the background, looking at the pathways in the photographs or pathways that I could create. This photograph is simply a heroic shot of man's best friend. I believe this photograph is artistic because it incorporates 3 compositional techniques. Felt that the editing really brought out more of this photograph than the others that I took that day, and again, it gives man's best friend that heroic feel. The trees act as leading lines because it guides your eye in a curved pattern from the lower left corner to the upper right hand corner where Sandy is. Lastly, this photograph uses depth of field with Sandy in focus and slightly blurring out the background to draw focus to her as she stands there proud looking off into the distance. During the semester, I learned that I like to photograph nature, which is funny because I don't usually like going outdoors, but I did enjoy the last 3 projects because I was able to go outside and take photographs of those amazing creatures and flowers, which I have a new appreciation for. I learned that my personal style for photographs usually involves a lot of bright color. Nothing crazy though, and throughout the semester, I did have a lot of help from my friends Simon and Peter, who gave me great advice on properly exposing my photographs when I was taking them and editing tips before turning in my final projects. I would say that my editing still needs work just because I've only scratched the surface of what you can do in Photoshop and Lightroom. And honestly, the only other thing that I can keep working on is just keep experimenting with the camera settings and just my style of photography moving forward.